Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Here with my top 10 lists of cards I want to brew around from Eldritch Moon. Now, a lot of you have seen these in the past. I know I missed it with Shadows over Innistrad, but this is kind of a tradition with this channel that when either before a set comes out or right after a set comes out, I give my top 10 list of cards from that set that I want to brew around. Now, let's keep in mind these aren't the most powerful cards, or they're not going to be format defining or even going to find a home in Standard, but they are going to be cards that interest me enough that I'm going to try to build and brew around specific decks that have these cards in them. In fact, they will most likely be the focal point of those said decks. So again, before I get all the hate in the comment sections about how this card is better or that this card sucks, again, these are just interesting cards that I want to brew around. For all those who may be new to the channel, I call myself the Rogue Deck Builder because I like to take decks that are more off the beaten path or are not tier 1 by any means, more maverick or what we call rogue strategies, and brew around those strategies and those cards. So I hope you enjoy this list, and we'll start off the bat with an honorable mention. Now, many of you may know the reason why I'm doing this card as an honorable mention is this is just a duck card because anything that has potential to fit in a Soul Sisters package, I'm going to be very excited to try it out in my pet deck, Soul Sisters. You can go on my channel. I've played the death out of Soul Sisters. The big reason that I am a huge fan of Soul Sisters is it won me a PTQ, and I actually got to compete in a Pro Tour because of a Soul Sisters deck. So ever since then, I've been trying to tinker with the deck list. Recently, I've tried Thalia's Lieutenant from Shadows over Innistrad. Absolutely love the card in Soul Sisters. I'm not quite sure that it's going to be a staple in the brew, but recently I've been more of a humans-based build, cutting like Squadron Hawks and running like a full package of all four, or all of four of each of the Soul Sisters, as well as some Auric Champions, and because it does give value off of the Thalia's Lieutenant. So I think that this is the direction that you need to go with my honorable mention, which is Lone Rider. I think that it fits more in a human aggro package, with Soul Sisters kind of being the sub-theme. I think that you still want to gain a lot of life, but Sarah's Ascendant is also a human, so I really like Thalia's Lieutenant with Sarah's Ascendant, and I think Lone Rider also has a lot of synergy with Thalia's Lieutenant, because if you can, on turn number 1, place out a Sarah's Ascendant, and then turn number 2, put out Lone Rider, and then turn number 3, Thalia's Lieutenant will gain you a life, and then Lone Rider will be able to swing in for 2 damage, and then Lone Rider will flip at the end step because you gain 3 or more life. Once this card does flip into 4/4, I think that is really, really powerful in Modern. It's going to feel like another Champion of the Parish that can get out of hand really quickly in a human-like strategy, and I think I'm going to have a champion build, maybe even cut the Ajani's Pridemate. The problem with the Pridemate is one of the better cards in Soul Sisters. So I don't know if we have enough room for Lone Rider and Ajani's Pridemate and Thalia's Lieutenant, as well as Champion of the Parish. So it's going to be some mix of those type of cards that I'm going to try to make a deck work. I also think Lone Rider is very interesting in Standard, but I'm not quite sure where it wants to be. I think like a Gisela / Kalitas brew, it might be viable. As it is a 1/1 first strike lifelink, I think the first strike is actually very relevant against like humans based decks, as it can first strike down those dragon hunters and Gideons and whatnot. On to my number 10 card. My number 10 card is a card that I think fits more in a very, very low creature count deck, because you do want to get as many instant or sorceries in the graveyard as quickly as possible. I think this card will be modern playable in Delver or brews like Delver. Like, it fits perfectly with Young Pyromancer, or Monastery Mentor, Monastery Swiftspear, Delver Secrets, Snapcaster Mage, and this is Bedlam Reveler. But let's not talk about Modern. I think this card is going to be very, very good in Modern because it's going to easily be reduced down to 2, 3, or 4 converted mana cost, and has a very powerful ability in those type of decks, especially in decks that want to dump out their hand as quick as possible and then actually get some card advantage. So I'm really liking the Bedlam Reveler. It is an 8 mana for a 3/4, but costs 1 less for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. It also has prowess, And then when it enters the battlefield, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. I'm going to like it a lot in like an Eldrazi Displacer and a Goblin Dark Dwellers because it gives me another package with the Eldrazi Displacer. But the brew that I want to build it in Standard is going to be Black, Red, Burn. So literally the only creatures I think I'm going to run in the deck is possibly Abbot of Carol Keep, the Bedlam Reveler, and possibly Goblin Dark Dwellers. I think that there are so many burn spells like Exquisite Firecraft. We have the new 3-mana burn spell. We are missing like a 1-mana reliable burn spell, but you can still fill that slot with creature removal with Fiery Impulse or the new 2-mana shock out of Eldritch Moon. And then actually Black has quite a few of the 3-mana lose 3 life type cards in the format that I think there's plenty to actually run this burn type strategy. So it really works well with the Madness, the 3 damage Madness spell, Fiery Temper, as well as the 3 loss of life, Alms of Veins, I think is what it's called, from Black, because you can discard those if they're still in your hand and then draw 3 cards. So it'll trigger off their Madness and you'll still get value out of them and then fill back up your hand with the Bedlam Reveler. On to number 9. Number 9 is kind of an awkward card to brew around, but I think in the right deck it's going to be powerful enough. I think this is more of a limited card than it is like a brew card in Constructed. It's very vulnerable, but this is Wharf Infiltrator. Wharf Infiltrator is a 2-mana for a 1/1 with Skulk. Whenever Wharf Infiltrator deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So it's got that loot ability, but it's quite quick. It's just a 2-mana, so on turn 3 you can do this and then attack in. But it also says whenever you discard a creature card, you may pay 2. If you do, put a 3/2 colorful Eldrazi horror creature token on the battlefield. I think that's where it shines. So it has its own enabler on Madness, but this is like something that, like say turn 4, for example, off a Tormenting Voice, you can actually discard a creature and then pay the 2 mana to then put out a 3/2 colorful Eldrazi horror token. It works pretty good with Olivia, but you're into Grixis colors at that point, and this is not a vampire. But a few of the other vampires this synergizes quite well with, because those vampires have Madness, and so especially like turn 4, if you can Madness them out, you can actually get a 3/2 Eldrazi plus the Madness creature. On to number 8. Number 8 is one that I think works really well with the Bedlam Reveler, which is Prying Questions. So here again is another 3-mana spell. Through Goblin Dark Dwellers, you can actually flash back and get some advantage out of. And target opponent loses 3 life and puts a card from his hand on top of his or her library. That is basically discard, but it's not giving them the Madness ability. So Prying Questions, we've seen a couple of these cards in the Shadows of Innistrad that rather than discarded it exiled. Well, this one just puts it back on top of their library. It just screws up their curve. Yes, they get to choose. So they're going to get it back to on their next turn, but it really just sets them back an entire turn, and they lose 3 lives. It really feels like Kolgan's Command, the 2 damage and discard a card. Well, this is 3 life and discard a card for 3 mana. Again, it works perfectly with the Goblin Dark Dwellers. It fits in that type of shelf for the Black-Red burn. We have so many now, a ton of options. I think it's viable, especially against those grindy control-based decks. This is a perfect card to slam down on turn number 3. Number 7, we finally get a good 1-drop zombie, and this is a very sweet 1-drop zombie. We get some interesting zombie cards in the format, but this is by far the best one, which is Cryptbreaker. It's a 1/1 for a zombie that has the ability of discarding a card, put a 2/2 black zombie creature on the battlefield for 2 and tap. But where it really shines is you tap 3 untapped zombies you control, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So it's very similar to there's an elf that taps 3 elves to add a mana to the mana pool. So what this does is it gets around Summoning Sickness. You can actually just tap 3 untapped zombies to draw a card and lose life. So if you have ways to get out untapped zombies, the only problem with like from under the floorboards is they come into play tap. So that's kind of the drawback to a lot of the zombies, is they do come onto the battlefield tap. For those that don't, then we will be able to tap them to actually get some value, drawing a card. And you can kind of go crazy in a zombie tribal deck with this. Gives you that card drawing engine, at just a 1-mana spell. So I really like Cryptbreaker, especially after that too, of being able to discard a card. Works good in a mana-based deck. You can get rid of all those unnecessary lands late game or just unnecessary spells and at least get a 2/2 black zombie creature token on the battlefield. On to number 6 is another card that I think is just really cool. Any flicker type effect I'm going to be a fan of, and this one is Identity Thief. Too bad that we don't have Siege Rhino in the format, because I think Identity Thief would have paired very well with Siege Rhino. Whenever Identity Thief attacks, it's 4 mana for a 0/3 shapeshifter. Whenever it attacks, you may exile another target non-token creature. If you do, Identity Thief becomes a copy of that creature until end turn, and then return to the battlefield under its control at the beginning of the next end step. So Identity Thief is kind of cool because you can actually exile your opponent's cards. You don't really want a lot of, you don't want it to be doing that to your opponent's enter the battlefield type abilities, because that's just, bad. So you don't want to really be doing it to their Thought-Knot Seer, because you don't get any really advantage off of Identity Thief. It doesn't enter the battlefield after you exile something. So Identity Thief itself doesn't get an ETB trigger, but if you're exiling your own cards, say your Thought-Knot Seer or your Brood Monitor or anything else like Goblin Dark Dwellers is a great one, you get some advantage. It also curves really well with Goblin Dark Dwellers. You can go Identity Thief, cast Goblin Dark Dwellers, get a spell for free, and then attack with Identity Thief, turn it into a 4/4 menace, and then at the end of turn you get another flashback on another spell in your deck. So really like it with synergizing with Goblin Dark Dwellers. As you can tell, Goblin Dark Dwellers is one of my favorite cards in Standard at the moment, and I'm always looking for ways to break it. But Identity Thief, again, on the backside, is any creature your opponent has, Identity Thief at least gets to copy that on the attack step. So any sort of combat damage effect or any sort of like static ability, Identity Thief can gain that. Number 5 is one of the cards that I think is the most underrated. I'll repeat that. Extremely underrated card that I think is going to see a lot of Standard play when people figure out how powerful this ability is. But I think that it's really cool in a token-based strategy, an Aristocrats-based strategy, and is a pretty good answer against Westvale Abbey and some other indestructible or hexproof type cards. And this is Voldaren Pariah. This is a sweet card for 5 minutes of 3/3. It does have Madness, but the thing is you can use it immediately for 5 mana if you have the secondary cost that you'll need, which is sacrifice 3 other creatures to transform it. Transforms into a 6/5 and also makes your opponent sacrifice 3 creatures. So it's a one-sided board wipe. The problem that I have with Languish is a lot of times I want to be using it in a deck where I am also using creatures. This kind of gets around that. It's not quite a double-sided board wipe. This is just usually a one-sided. There's not a lot of decks that have more than 3 creatures out on turn number 5. Yes, some Coco decks and human decks will be the exception to that. But this is going to work perfectly. I think a green-black kind of the rock type strategy. This also synergizes on curve right now with like cards, either one of the Thopters of Pyroncron, Nalar, or Whirler Rogue. It also is decent with like Eyeless Watcher out of green. It's also good with even the Eldrazi, a lot of Eldrazi Scion tokens. And Secure the Waste is another way to kind of get some value out of this. Plant tokens off of Nissa. I think there's plenty of ways to get value. The Madness is just an upside because you can put it in a vampire-based deck and discard it to the 2/1 vampire that turns into a 3/2 flyer, and then sacrifice some of your lower end vampires at that point to clear your opponent's board and be left with a 6/5 Eldrazi that's going to be very, very tough for your opponent to deal with. So I think the Voldaren Pariah is incredibly underrated at this point, and will most likely people will start to pick it up. There's so many token-based strategies right now. Again, the sacrifice is huge. It gets around that pesky indestructible on the Westvale Abbey. Number 4. Number 4 is a card I misread. So if some of you saw my market video, I misread this card and thought that it gave itself its trigger, but I think it's still powerful enough because I think that this is one of the mechanics that I'm most interested to brew around is definitely Emerge. And this one is by far, I think, the most interesting Emerge ability, which is the Big Pig, otherwise known as the Decimator of Providences. This card is very similar to the Crater of Behemoth, which is another card that started off the Standard season when it was in play. very underwhelming, and then became a huge staple in not only Standard, not only Modern, but also Legacy. So this is a 7/7 for 10 mana, but it also has the Emerge cost of 9, and when you cast it, creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain trample until a turn. It does not quite give them haste. It does have haste itself, so you're going to be beating in with the 7/7. Where I really like this card is like sacrificing a Brood Monitor, for example, or any other, even a Whirler Rogue, or, I mean, Whirler Rogue doesn't get around the 3 green. You can also merge colorless creatures like a Blight Herder. A Blight Herder would be perfect. But even a lower end like an Eyeless Watcher, you're going to reduce it by 4, and at that point, then it will only cost the 5 mana. So on curve, you can give at least your 1/1 Eldrazi Signs. If you cast a Scion Summoner before that, you have 4 creatures that get +2/+2, and you're going to be swinging in most likely for lethal, if not close to lethal. Number 3 is my favorite out of the collectives. This one is Collective Defiance, and basically this is on my list because I've always tried to make Waste Not viable in Modern, and I think this might be the card that actually pushes it over the top. Where I like this is more of my Waste Not Storm Brew. So this is a perfect card to either be flashbacked by a Past in Flames, and then can give you a ton more cards. The thing is, you have to you want to usually do this versus your opponent. Target player discards all the cards in their hand and then draws that many cards, and you can really chain that off with like Reforge the Soul, and it might just end up replacing Dark Deal, or just adding to it. I thought that between Burning Inquiry and Dark Deal, the problem is like you don't want to use a lot of the other targeted removal or targeted discard spells, with the exception of I like Raven's Crime, but it's Reforge the Soul a lot of times is unreliable. Collective Defiance curves perfectly with Waste Not, and so on turn number 3 you can actually just get rid of your opponent's hand, and at that point, if it does resolve, and even if you discard like 4 or 5 cards, you're getting so much value off of Waste Not, and it also works like Liliana's Caress too, so it curves perfectly with Liliana's Caress. And the Escalate's kind of nice too, because your opponent, a lot of times with Waste Not, they're down to very, very low, or Liliana's Caress, they're down to very low, and it's just that last bit of damage you try to get off that is kind of pesky, or like they have no more cards in hand, and you need to get off that last bit of damage, and that's where I think Collective Defiance is perfect for that last little 3 damage that you can do to your opponent. What I do like about Collective Defiance too, speaking of Goblin Dark Dwellers, is it fits perfectly with Goblin Dark Dwellers, as you can cast the Escalate with Goblin Dark Dwellers. So Goblin Dark Dwellers gets the free 3 mana, and then you just pay 1. I mean, that is a 6 mana Goblin Dark Dwellers, but still, that is huge, huge, huge value. So now on to the top 2, and I think that the top 2 I'm incredibly excited about, because both these cards are just really, really interesting. And the number 2 is going to be a little bit harder than number 1. Number 1 is a given. I've already brewed 5 decks with my number 1 card, and they're all pretty sweet. I have to test them, of course. They're all just theory crafting at this point. But my number 2 card is also just theory crafting, but I think it's very, very underrated and very powerful, which is Emrakul's Influence. Speaking about Emerge, Emrakul's Influence just draws you 2 cards whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, converted mana cost 7 or greater. So most of the Emerge, I think all the Emerge cards are actually 7 or greater, and so you can basically chain off Emerge cards. So once you cast your first Emerge card, you should have some leftover mana to then sacrifice that Emerge card, and then emerge another one in, and emerge another one in. There are some pretty sweet Emerge cards. One puts a permanent, non-land permanent on top of the library, another one draws you 2 more cards, another one basically eats your opponent's hand. What are some other ones? There's the Big Pig. So I think in basically a Soul Tie Emerge deck, Emrakul's Influence is going to be pretty sweet. I don't know how, it's going to be kind of awkward to really get the combo off because you have so many high converted mana costs, but I think it's going to be in a Crypto with Right type deck. Crypto with Right also is something that can tap for those other mana that you can't get off of like emerging, because the converted mana costs of Emerge cards are going to be colorless, and most of them, I think all of them actually do require you to actually spend colored mana. So I think in like a token based strategy with Crypto with Right, that's where you can basically go off, and that's an easier way to generate a consistent bit of mana to then with Crypto with Right to then just kind of go crazy with Emrakul's influence. So drum roll, please. This is the card that I'm most excited to brew around. I know there's a lot of other people that have talked about this. I think that if Scapeshift were ever to be banned in Modern, this is definitely a good alternative to Scapeshift because it does a very similar ability, which is the Splendid Reclamation. This card is insanely good. It is a 4-mana return all lands from your graveyard back to the battlefield tapped. It does have sorcery speed, but I don't think that hurts it too much. Right now, I've got just a little bit of a spoiler. I've got a few decks that I'm theory crafting right now. The first one is a Sultai based deck running Sylvan Advocate and Tireless Tracker, as well as the Haunted Dead and Prized Amalgam. So we're actually going to self-mill ourselves for the lands, and then why I chose those colors is because it's got the two most powerful, in my opinion, lands that get turned on by Sylvan Advocate. One is Hissing Quagmire, and the other one's Lumbering Falls. People will say, well, you go into an Abzan list, but I think blue is just a little bit better for self-milling. Abzan, I guess, could be the way to go, but if you're self-milling, you might as well go Prized Amalgam. But you could easily just go into Abzan if the lifelink land is a bit better. I don't know what white. I haven't really checked white, what it actually has to offer beyond that. But out of the green-black shell, you could actually go Jund too. Jund is quite easily. We have the Sylvan Advocate, the Tireless Tracker, Den Protector that likes to self-mill, and the Gitrog Monster that have very, very good synergy. We also have Grim Flayer, which can help us mill those and loot those cards in the graveyard for the huge Splendid Reclamation. But blue also gives us Possess Scab, which also can get back the Splendid Reclamation, because you are going to be milling your own Splendid Reclamations that you do need to cast back. But I think that through cards like the Black Collected, you can get a lot of advantage off of putting lands in the graveyard through the discard outlet on the Black Collected. We have the Gather the Pack, which I think is the best. That's why I also want to kind of go this Sultai, because it allows me to run the most amount of creatures for Gather the Pack. We have the Vessel from green that I think is pretty interesting. We have grapple with the past. There's Catalog even that you can get rid of, press the advantage, things like that they can mill a lot of lands and then get some value out of it afterwards. But definitely Gitrog Monster is kind of cool with this kind of self-mill strategy. You're going to get back all of your lands. Maybe we do need something to do with our lands, but that's why I chose Lumbering Falls and Hissing Quagmire. So that's kind of this Sultai list. What I'm really looking forward to try to do is an Omnoth deck, a landfall deck with a Valakut Dragon and Omnoth. So Splendid Reclamation, Omnoth hits, Splendid Reclamation hits, and then you get back all of your lands that you've looted through Magmatic Insight and Tormenting Voice and similar cards like that. I think we actually have a few other self-looting cards. Collected Defiance could be one for sure. And then we get it back with Splendid Reclamation, all the lands back, they trigger off Omnoth, and then you get back one Westville Abbey. You can then sacrifice all of your 5/5s if they have a way to actually deal with that. It's going to do 3 damage per elemental that dies, or you could just flat out attack in with the huge elemental horde that you have after a Splendid Reclamation. The Dragon is also very interesting because for every land that comes in the battlefield, it's going to do 1 damage. For every mountain, it's going to do 2 damage. And so it's like Valakut in Standard. So it's a pretty sweet little combination. And it curves pretty well because I think that after about turn 6 or turn 7 is when you're going to try to go off. We can also still run cards like Explosive Vegetation and this is Renewal. I think those are still fine options. And you could even try in a heavier red-based strategy through the Pyromancer's goggles, because you can start looting a crazy amount through the Magmatic Insights and the Tormenting Voice if you're copying those. So Splendid Reclamation, I think, goes perfectly in that type of deck. Again, you can combine the best of both worlds with Jund and get the Grim Flayer as well as the Gitrog Monster and all the other good things that come out of splashing in black. With that, but I think that Tireless Tracker, Sylvan Advocate, the red, what is it called, Dragon Lord Outcast, all want the landfall abilities. There are some interesting landfall creatures, and I believe they're elementals as well. There's the 4/4 that gets +2/+2 whenever land comes into play and has trample. There's also the Zendikar Incarnate, I think is what it's called, that reads, its power reads how many lands are on the battlefield, and it's a star 4. Does it have trample? I can't remember. There's also the Hydra with landfall, and the other Hydra that goes and gets you a land, I think it's called the Ulvenwald Hydra, that I think is pretty sweet. All of these, Evolving Wilds is still in the format. We have a few other sack lands, but I think Evolving Wilds is the one that shines the most. But it's just Tireless Tracker that's pretty sweet. I'm not sure if we have a lot of any sort of sack outlets for lands. We do have like the Blighteds. That's what I think. I think the black Blighted land's the best one for this type of strategy. Those could definitely go in this deck. So that's my number 1 pick. I'm interested in your comments in the comment section below for what your favorite card out of Eldritch Moon is. Again, this is not necessarily the most powerful card. It's just a card that interests me the most to brew around the format. Hope you enjoyed this video, and for more videos on these brews specifically, I'm going to be trying over the next week or two. Once they're legal on MTGO. I don't want to do paper. It's just a pain in the ass to actually record live games and whatnot. Maybe I'll show you some paper brews in the meantime. The Splendid Reclamation, I can do some fairy crafting with it. But as soon as it's out on the MTGO, I'll start brewing these and do full video series either on this channel or Gathering Magic or both, and we'll start the brew process with Eldritch Moon. So I hope you enjoyed this list. Again, please feel free to comment in the comment section below for your favorite card, and be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Think what you have what it takes to become a Rogue Master Brewer? Then be sure to click the link to the left that will take you to a page for more information on how to join our Rogue Master Brewer competition that will be coming soon in August. Feel free to use any card from my top 10 list, or be creative and use a card from Eldritch Moon. Check back often for more information on this competition. Thanks for watching.